first and last lines, we all agonize over them. The first line sets the scene. It's the establishing shot if you're a screenwriter. And the last line is what's going to linger in your readers' minds for long afterwards, hopefully. But what about chapter or scene endings? Your novel's not over yet, but we all know most readers, myself included, I'm sure you too, very rarely read a novel all the way through in one sitting. We take breaks in between chapters. And whenever a reader closes your book for the night and puts it away, however that chapter ended, we want to make sure that it leaves them just dying to open the book and get back into the story the next day. That doesn't always mean ending on a cliffhanger, although don't get me wrong, I love a good cliffhanger. But the last few lines of a scene or chapter need to do more than just keep the reader hooked. It gives them the emotional resonance that you want them to carry with them into the next scene. You guys have heard me mention The Magic Words by Cheryl Klein enough times now to know that it is my favorite writing craft book. And in it, she compares scene endings to fermatas in music. Now, if you're not a musician or you've never seen this before, a fermata looks like this, and you'll see it in sheet music. When a musician sees that symbol over a note or a chord, it tells them that they're going to hold that note or chord out and kind of extend the beat, extend the tempo before resuming the tempo of the piece. That's really the perfect analogy for chapter endings, because while it is an ending of sorts, sort of a pause, it's not the actual end of the piece or of your book. Another reason you really want to think hard about how you end every chapter is because it really has a huge effect on your novel's pacing. Here are 3 ways I've seen bad chapter endings throw off an otherwise great novel's pacing. 1, every chapter's fermata lands on the same chord. What do I mean by this? Let's say you're writing a novel about a deeply suspicious woman who, at the start of the story, is told by her fortune teller that she is going to die in 1 week. And the novel is about what this woman chooses to do over the course of this week. Of course, you want to keep reminding the reader throughout the story of the stakes of the book and the premise. She's been told she's going to die and she believes it. But if you end every single chapter with some variation of, in 5 days, she would be dead, then your pacing is gonna feel pretty flat and monotonous. Number 2, chapters end on the wrong chord entirely. Let's say you've got a scene filled with tension, a confrontation, maybe a fight, and things get resolved by the end of the scene, but then one of the characters makes a joke because you want to break the tension. Fine, that's great. But if that's the very last thing that happens in the scene, if the reader is carrying a funny moment after all of this tension into the next chapter, they're probably going to be confused about how they're supposed to be feeling right now. It's like ending the theme to Jaws on a major chord. It just doesn't work. Number 3, lazy cliffhangers or twists, and I hesitate to even call these twists. I have read many a mediocre mystery novel that does this. The scene's rolling along, things are happening, everything is perfectly exciting, and then there's a knock at the door or the phone rings and the protagonist opens it or answers it. So I'm supposed to keep reading another chapter for the night just to find out who's on the other line? No, that's lazy. I don't care. Twists and cliffhangers or whatever, no matter how small they are, they have to be actually relevant to the plot, and there has to be some reason that the readers are going to care. I don't particularly care if someone is calling on the phone out of the blue, unless maybe the reader is expecting a really terrible phone call. Then I'm gonna read on to find out if it's the call she's been dreading. It just has to be relevant to the plot. Now, I'm not saying it's bad to end your scene with something totally expected and out of the blue. That can be really great. But again, in some way, it needs to relate back to the story in a way the reader can understand. As an example, one of my very favorite chapter endings, maybe of all time, is in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, when Harry, Ron, and Hermione are in the Gryffindor common room, and they're talking to Sirius in the fireplace using flue powder, and they're having this deep, intense conversation, and it's abruptly cut off when Umbridge's hand comes through the fireplace and starts trying to grab at Sirius's head, and everybody runs off. And that's the end of the chapter. That's fantastic because it's a very abrupt reminder to Harry and to us that he and everybody he loves are being monitored at all times by a But like I said before, not all chapters need to have cliffhanger endings to keep the reader hooked. Klein uses an example in the magic words from a book that she edited called Marcello in the Real World. In the scene she uses, the protagonist Marcello is having a rather tense conversation with his father Arturo, who believes he can cure his son's autism by forcing him to behave the way normal people behave. He tries to make a deal with Marcello and kind of attempts to manipulate him into taking it. And the deal is that if Marcello agrees to spend the entire summer as an intern at his father's law firm, and if he is successful as an intern by his father's definition, then his father will allow Marcello to choose where he goes to high school his senior year. In the end, Marcello doesn't fall for the manipulation, but he does agree to think about it. And here are the last few lines of the scene. "All right," I say, "I will think about it. I start to walk towards my treehouse. Namu, who has been lying at my feet all the time, walks by my side. 'You are getting too old to live in a treehouse,' I hear Arturo say behind me. I pretend his words do not reach me." Now imagine this scene ended at the line about his dog following him. That would have ended this scene on a slightly more positive note. It would have given us a sense of companionship, that Marcello isn't alone, that someone understands him even if his father doesn't. He has allies. Now, what about if the scene had ended on the line of dialogue where his father says he's too old to live in a treehouse? That would have been a little bit of a more ominous ending because it would have given Arturo the last word. And it wouldn't have been quite the right ending for this scene, the right final note. Because while Arturo spent the entire chapter trying to manipulate his son into saying yes to something, Marcello does hold out. He says he'll think about it. So the real last line of this chapter, "I pretend his words do not reach me," that gives Marcello the power in this scene. It's a victory, but kind of a hollow one, which is as it should be because eventually Marcello will take this deal. That line leaves us with a sense of disconnect between these two characters and uneasiness for Marcello. So today's writing workshop activity is a really easy one, and I hope you guys will participate. Take a chapter from the book you're working on now or from a book you love and choose a chapter, and I want you to rewrite the last few lines of that chapter deliberately to end it on a completely different emotional tone. If it ends ominously, maybe try to end it in a way that feels a little bit more resolved. If it ends on a moment of pure joy, maybe try to slip in something a little more unsettling. You don't necessarily have to change what happens in the scene. As in the example with Marcello and the Real World, it's more about what the protagonist or the narrator chooses to focus on. Now that we've talked about endings, let's talk about beginnings. Next week's Writing Workshop Wednesday is going to be all about prologues. When they work, when they don't work, and how to know if your novel needs one. So if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you know when that episode goes up. That's it for today's Writing Workshop Wednesday. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, I would very much appreciate a thumbs up if you found this video helpful, and I would love to see those chapter endings that you rewrote a few times down in the comments below if you'd like to share. I'll see you guys Friday with another Fiction Fix It, and until then, keep writing.